Hey guys, tonight we're sliding through candlelit corridors that smell of beeswax jasmine and just a hint of conspiracy. You're padding along in velvet slippers, your hand brushing a wall lined with tapestries that show hunting scenes nobody here has ever actually hunted. The air is heavy, gold dust heavy, with perfume and the faint jingle of a guard's halberd somewhere down the hall. This is not a museum. It's the living heart of a royal palace where fashion and power share the same heartbeat. And right now, you're following the soft-voiced footsteps of a royal mistress, the woman who can change the cut of a gown or the course of a war before breakfast. You probably won't survive this if you sneeze at the wrong moment. The scent of cinnamon and danger is that thick. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these midnight wanderings reach across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slide past a carved door whose hinges have been oiled with such care that it makes no sound. Inside, light pools on parquet floors like melted honey. There's a hush, but it's not empty, it's the hush of plotting. You're in the velvet corridors of influence, where the king's mistress holds informal court. She's not on any official roll of ministers, but her word can shift the price of lace in Antwerp overnight. Historians still argue whether this kind of soft power was orchestrated by clever women or simply tolerated by careless kings. You watch as she gestures to a tailor crouched at her feet, pins in his mouth, adjusting the fall of her sleeve. 1 inch higher and it signals modesty, 1 inch lower and it signals rebellion. You feel the textures around you, damask curtains that suck up sound, carpets deep enough to swallow a dropped brooch. The mistress moves like someone who knows every squeak in the floorboards. This is a mainstream historical fact. At Versailles, Louis XV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, effectively became the arbiter of taste and even state appointments. She had entire workshops dedicated to creating new porcelain styles and fabrics. You imagine her modern equivalent would run a global fashion house and a secret WhatsApp chat with defense ministers. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some mistresses had secret codes stitched into their gowns. Tiny variations in embroidery, a cluster of pearls, a twist of black thread that told allies when to approach or when to stay away. Think of it as 18th century status emojis hidden in plain sight. Tonight, as you stand behind a screen painted with pastoral scenes, you see a lady-in-waiting touch the hem of the mistress's gown, reading it like a message. The mistress's boudoir is more like a command center than a dressing room. There's a table littered with ribbon samples, swatches of brocade from, and a rolled-up plan of the next court masquerade. Every object here is both personal and political. Even the mirror seems to tilt toward her, reflecting not just her face but her influence. You watch her try on a new necklace, sapphires the size of marbles. Each stone isn't just pretty. It's a diplomatic thank you from a duchy hopping for a favorable treaty. As she turns, you catch the edge of her perfume, amber, orange blossom, and the unmistakable note of power. Back then, scents were as good as signatures. A royal mistress's favorite perfume could spark a trade boom in the ingredients it used. Some merchants even risked smuggling recipes across borders. Historians still argue whether perfumers were spies, passing notes hidden in wax-sealed bottles. You're trying not to cough from the incense as you follow her deeper into the private corridor. Torches flare behind decorative grilles, throwing latticed shadows on your path. She pauses to look at a tapestry showing a mythological queen taming a lion. The symbolism is obvious. She's aligning herself with legendary female power. You realize she's rehearsing how she'll be remembered. Even her spontaneous choices are curated for future chroniclers. From a side door comes the muted sound of music, a lute practicing a new air. She opens it and glides in, greeting a small group of poets, artists, and designers. This is her salon, a laboratory for taste. You're perched in the corner, listening as she casually remarks that blue suits the king's complexion better than green. By tomorrow, tailors will be scrambling to make blue the new mandatory color for courtiers. This is not hyperbole. One documented shift at Versailles saw entire wardrobes rendered unfashionable overnight because of a mistress's passing comment. A footman brings in a tray of candied violets. She picks one up, chews thoughtfully, then waves at a sketch for a new kind of chair, lighter, easier to move during intimate gatherings. You blink, realizing you're watching the prototype of what will become a standard in European drawing rooms. In this atmosphere, even furniture design can be a form of social choreography. The mistress catches your eye, or at least seems to. Her gaze is like a candle's flame, warm but potentially burning. She says something softly to a jeweler about setting stones like drops of dawn. The man nods furiously, already sketching. Later, that style will appear in court portraits, and decades later in museum collections labeled anonymous innovation. There's a moment of stillness as she sits to have her hair brushed. The motion is hypnotic, strokes of ivory comb through thick coils. Hair in this world is more than hair, it's a billboard. At some courts, mistresses built entire narratives into their coiffures, miniature ships or gardens perched atop powdered waves. Tonight her style is simpler but signals a retreat from public scandal, a calculated calm. You note the paradox. She controls the mood of a kingdom but can't control a stray lock of hair. Your senses drift, candle smoke, murmured gossip, the faint rustle of hidden papers. Remember that earlier joke about sneezing. Here it could really be fatal. A misplaced sound might reveal you're eavesdropping. You pull your cloak. The mistress rises and leads her coterie to a long gallery where portraits hang like silent judges. Each painting is a past power player, some queens, some former favorites who lost their footing. She pauses under one, a woman with dark eyes and an elaborate pearl choker. She thought pearls meant purity, the mistress murmurs to herself. They meant a leash. You're not sure she knows you're listening. This gallery isn't just art, it's a cautionary tale. Every frame is a reminder of how fashion can both elevate and doom. You recall a mainstream historical fact. King Charles II's mistress Nell popularized informal, stage-inspired clothing at court, scandalizing but also softening England's rigid style codes. Yet her portrait hangs with a faint air of tragedy, a comet's tail of influence fading. Historians still debate whether she crafted that image herself, or whether later artists sanitized her for public memory. Back in the corridor, you notice how the mistress's footsteps echo differently on alternating tiles. It's a subtle design. One pattern signals a private path, another a public route. Architecture itself conspires with secrecy. You're essentially walking inside a coded system, half palace, half labyrinth. Somewhere above, the king thinks he's hosting a simple reception, unaware that every accessory on display tonight has been pre-approved by his favorite. Another quirky tidbit for you. Some mistresses hired echo testers, young servants who walked halls at odd hours to map where whispers carried. That's how they picked the best spots for confidential talks. You wonder how many social media managers today would kill for that level of acoustic analytics. You trail her to a balcony where night air seeps in, cool and damp. Below, gardens spread like embroidered carpets, each hedge trimmed into allegory. She leans on the balustrade, looking out, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. For a moment she seems tired, the weight of jewels, whispers, and constant reinvention pressing on her shoulders. You almost feel sympathy, though you know she would not hesitate to use you as a pawn in tomorrow's intrigue. A bell tolls somewhere, marking the hour. She straightens, mask of serenity back in place, and turns inside. Her staff swarms around her with notes, fabrics, and schedules. You realize you've been on your feet for hours, and yet the night here is only beginning. As you move with her retinue toward yet another hidden door, you sense the narrative tightening. You've seen how, in these velvet corridors, influence is stitched into hems, perfumed into the air, whispered in candlelight. You also see the risk, a single misstep, a new favorite at court, and this entire ecosystem collapses. Historians still argue whether these women were proto-feminist power brokers or simply instruments of a patriarchal system. Standing here, you sense it's both, agency and constraint in a dance as intricate as the embroidery on her cuffs. She disappears into her private chapel for a moment of prayer or performance, you can't tell which. You're left alone in the corridor, the tapestry swaying slightly as if breathing. The hum of the palace settles into your bones. You're inside the bloodstream of history, where fashion and power are inseparable, and the royal mistress is both heartbeat and pulse. You slip away from the chapel door just as a pair of footmen glide past with silver trays, their shoes squeaking faintly on the polished parquet. The mistress's scent lingers even though she's gone, a mixture of orange blossom, amber, and something darker that you can't quite name, the olfactory equivalent of a raised eyebrow. You follow that invisible trail like a thread, deeper into the palace. Here, the air changes. The candles burn with a flame, and faint whorls of smoke carry perfumes from some unseen still room. A narrow stairway leads you down to a set of low-arched rooms where you'd expect dusty cellars, but find instead a laboratory of smells in. Glass vials stand in ranks, powders sparkle under lamplight, and the warm sweetness of beeswax mixes with the metallic tang of crushed minerals. The mistress appears at the far end, seated on a carved stool, her gown carefully hitched up to avoid spills. This is where she plays her second game, not only choosing what to wear but dictating what the entire court will smell and look like. She picks up a small bottle and tips a few drops onto her wrist. The liquid glints pale green. She inhales, closes her eyes, then gives a tiny nod to the perfumer hovering beside her. In this world, perfume is politics. One mainstream historical fact. In 17th century France, perfumery was a thriving, state-regulated industry centered on. A mistress's endorsement of a particular scent could send the price of its ingredients soaring and crush rival perfumers overnight. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some scents doubled as secret medicine. A whiff of ambergris or civet was thought to guard against plague or melancholy. Mistresses were to pass along antidotes to selected courtiers in exchange for gossip. Tonight, you watch as she discreetly hands a tiny scented sachet to a trembling young noble. Protection, poison, or placebo. You can't tell. You edge closer, careful to stay in the shadow of a pillar carved with grapes and vines. The mistress gestures to a tray of pigments ground from lapis lazuli, cinnabar, and crushed cochineal insects. These powders will become her next cosmetic palette. She dips a finger into a rose paste and smooths it across the back of her hand, then tilts it under the lamplight. The glow is subtle but commanding. She smiles, a small victorious smile that tells you she's found tomorrow's shade. Historians still argue whether women like her actively invented these looks or merely what clever artisans brought to them. Watching her now, you feel the power in the choosing itself. The walls here are painted with faded frescoes of flowers and winged figures. Their eyes seem to follow you as you move from station to station. Jars of musk, stacks of silk ribbons, trays of tiny brushes. A miniature fountain burbles in the center, its water scented with lavender to keep the air fresh. Even the floor tiles are arranged in a pattern meant to echo a famous tapestry. Upstairs, a continuity of taste from underworld to throne room. She motions for a lady-in-waiting to sit, while the court painter works up a quick study of a new makeup effect. The mistress explains in a low voice how a slight change in the curve of an eyebrow can shift public perception from temptress to... The painter nods furiously, his quill scratching notes in the margin of his sketchbook. You're watching the birth of propaganda disguised as portraiture. A footman enters bearing a tray of small glass scent bottles sealed with wax. Each bears a different ribbon. The mistress selects two and hands the rest back. The perfumer bows, obviously relieved. Those two ribbons mean a contract, a royal nod of approval, a fortune secured. It's as if you've just watched someone win a tender for a modern weapons system, but in this case, the weapons are perfumes and powders. As she tests another vial, The mistress tells a story about an earlier who wore a perfume so overpowering the king banned her from the hunt. The hounds lost their sense of smell. You're not sure if it's true or a cautionary legend, but it makes her companions laugh politely. The is soft, like the edge of a fan closing, but it breaks the tension. She uses jokes the way some generals use maps. Remember that corridor above with its coated tiles? Down here, the codes are in and smell. A certain shade of blue means a diplomatic thaw. A certain blend of iris and leather signals a military campaign is about to be announced. You sniff the air, wondering how many messages you're missing because your nose isn't trained. The mistress rises, gown rustling like wind through a wheat field. She walks to a cabinet inlaid with mother of pearl and opens it to reveal a row of small paintings no larger than playing cards. They're studies of her face in different styles and cosmetics. Some show her as a chaste shepherdess, others as a martial goddess. It's her own menu of possible identities. She selects one and tucks it into a tiny frame set with seed pearls. Tomorrow, will circulate that she looked particularly saintly at morning mass. This is how she plans it. Historians still argue whether such self-presentation was conscious strategy or simply a survival mechanism in a dangerous court. But standing here, the evidence feels clear. She's running a one-woman branding agency law. She turns to you suddenly, or maybe just to the shadows where you're hiding, and says lightly, "Too much scent and you disappear behind it. Just enough and the world comes closer." Then she laughs, not unkindly, and resumes instructing her attendants. You feel a prickle along your neck, as if she's aware of your presence but amused by it. In the next alcove, artists grind for tapestries and panel paintings. Cochineal bugs shipped from the Americas are being crushed into crimson dust, mixed with honey and smeared onto parchment to test intensity. The mistress picks up a brush and draws a quick spiral, then blots it with a square of silk to see how the pigment transfers. She's not only choosing her own look, she's setting the palette for the murals, curtains, and court costumes that will echo her image. A soft breeze stirs the heavy curtains, carrying with it the distant clang from the guardroom. Even here, at the sensory heart of the palace, politics lurks. A new alliance means a new coat of arms means new on banners and new motifs on dresses. You catch a glimpse of a design for a masquerade costume that includes a hidden pocket, just large enough for a folded diplomatic note. Fashion as courier service. Another quirky tidbit. Some mistresses kept scent diaries, noting which perfumes they wore on which days to control how memories formed around them. Smell is the most primal sense. Tie a treaty to a certain scent and years later the mere whiff of it might soften a hardened rival. The mistress here closes her eyes, inhales from a vial, and murmurs something about the memory of lilacs before tucking it back into the cabinet. You lean against a marble column, dizzy from the swirl of it. It's like standing inside a living kaleidoscope. The mistress claps her hands softly, and attendants bring in trays of freshly laundered gloves. She slips on a pair lined with powdered iris root. Gloves at court aren't just gloves, they're skin-to-skin diplomacy. A handshake carries a scent as well as a message. She sits again, this time at a small table set with a mirror framed in gilt dolphins. The court painter dabs pigment onto her lips, then steps back. She leans forward, studies her reflection, and tilts her head. The light catches the fine down on her cheek. For a moment she looks very young, almost vulnerable. Then the expression shifts, the mask slides into place. "Good," she says. "Now paint it. You've just seen the prototype for the official portrait that will hang in the gallery upstairs." The perfumer whispers something about a new blend of rose and amber. She nods, then adds a pinch of something herself, stirring with a glass rod. A tiny tendril of smoke rises, carrying a scent you can't name but will never forget. It's like standing at the border between sweetness and steel. You think about the debates among scholars. Were these women manipulative schemers or simply navigating a male-dominated world using the tools available? Scent, image, charm. Watching her now, you sense that the question is too simple. She's not merely a footnote to a king's story. She's a node in a network of artisans, merchants, and diplomats, all orbiting the gravitational pull of her choices. The mistress stands and drapes a silk shawl over her shoulders, its edge embroidered with tiny gold bees. "We're done," she says to the room, and instantly everyone begins packing away vials and brushes. She leaves without looking back, trailing a new perfume that hasn't yet reached the market but soon will. You follow, blinking as the brighter light of the corridor hits your eyes. Upstairs again, the palace smells different now. Her scent has preceded her, ghosting through rooms like a herald. Courtiers sniff the air and straighten their cuffs, trying to guess what this new note means for their fortunes. A ripple of anticipation moves through the crowd. You're not just witnessing fashion. You're inside a system of coded signals where perfume is as potent as a decree. At the far end of the hall, musicians strike up a tune. The mistress pauses, lifts her chin, and smiles a smile that's already been rehearsed for tomorrow's portrait. Everyone takes their cue from her. A new trend, a new scent is about to unfurl across the kingdom, and you've been there at the moment of its creation, deep in the perfumed, painted heart of politics. The fragrance still clings to your clothes as you drift back into the palace's upper galleries. Your nose and eyes have been saturated with oils and pigments. Now, as you step into a larger, sun-filtered hall, your fingertips itch to touch something solid. Light slants through high windows and pools over bolts of cloth draped like waterfalls across trestle tables. The mistress has moved on from perfume and paint to her third realm of power, fabric, cut, and the daring lines of a neckline. You feel the textures before you even reach them. Velvet like warm moss, satin as slick as a fish, raw silk rough enough to catch at your skin. Each bolt carries not just but meaning. Here is crimson from cochineal insects shipped thousands of miles. Here is a green that whispers of arsenic-tinged dye and quiet headaches among the wearers. The mistress walks slowly between the piles, trailing her fingers, deciding what the court will see next season. She pauses at a loom stationed near the window. The weaver looks terrified and proud at once, his shuttle clacking nervously. This is no ordinary palace craft room. It's a think tank of cloth, a laboratory of status. One mainstream historical fact: under Louis XIV and Louis XV, entire manufactories in rose or fell on royal and mistress commissions, with new brocades and damasks unveiled as court fashion decreed. A single mistress's whim could make or break a guild. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some mistresses had secret fabric scouts who traveled incognito to fairs in Florence or Antwerp, smuggling back swatches hidden in the linings of cloaks. Tonight you watch as a young page discreetly empties a hidden pocket of tiny folded squares, shimmering taffeta, experimental blends of silk and metal thread. The mistress takes them without looking, as if she already knows what they are. She gestures for a lady-in-waiting to approach. A bolt of new silk is thrown over the girl's shoulders and pinned. The mistress circles, tugging here, smoothing there. She murmurs about lines of authority, a phrase you've never heard applied to clothing before. She's sketching with cloth the way a general sketches battle plans. Historians still argue whether these women consciously used cut and silhouette as coded statements, or whether the language of power simply seeped into their gowns. In one corner, a tailor is slicing fabric with a blade so sharp it doesn't seem to move, only to separate. The sound is soft, like tearing paper underwater. Each slice is a tiny political act. A high waistline signals one faction, a plunging another. You begin to that when the mistress appears at dinner tomorrow night. Every inch of her dress will be read like a treaty. The mistress stops by a frame where a new embroidery is taking shape, tiny golden bees on a midnight blue ground. You remember the bees on her shawl earlier and wonder what message she's layering here. A court says bees mean industry and loyalty, but an older legend claims they're the souls of the dead. Either way, she's stitching her own mythology. A footman brings a tray of pins topped with pearls. She selects one and fastens a fold in the fabric draped over the mannequin. "Too stiff," she murmurs. "It must flow like an argument." The tailor adjusts, sweat beading on his brow. You catch the scent of scorched wool from an iron warming on coals nearby. Even in luxury, there's in heat. Remember how in the perfumery she tested shades on her skin? Here she tests drape and movement, taking 3 steps forward, turning sharply, watching how the cloth pools and lifts. She isn't just designing, she's rehearsing an entrance. One mainstream historical fact: Madame Pompadour's preference for certain pastel shades and airy fabrics helped shift the entire Rococo aesthetic, softening the heavy Baroque into something lighter. Another quirky tidbit: some daring mistresses experimented with mechanical dresses that had hidden springs or pulleys to adjust a train mid-stride or reveal a secret panel. A few even built pockets large enough to hide notes or tiny gifts from lovers or allies. You picture an 18th century spy thriller unfolding in ruffles and bows. The mistress now moves to a long mirror leaning against the wall. She stands before it holding 2 contrasting fabrics, a somber silk and a riotous yellow brocade. She tilts her head, then drops the "We've mourned enough," she says softly. No one asks what she means. You suspect tomorrow's court appearance will announce not only a new but a new political mood. The hall hums with low voices. Merchants wait at a respectful distance, each hopping for her nod. She waves a hand and a young man steps forward with a ledger. He reads out shipments arriving from Genoa, Venice, and the East. Dyes, laces, strange new blends. The mistress listens, then marks 3 with her fan. Those are the ones that will be discovered at court next month. She's running a futures market in cloth. Historians still argue whether the power of mistresses lay in their proximity to kings or in their control of taste. Standing here, the second seems at least as potent as the first. If you can decide what everyone wears, you can decide how everyone appears. An appearance is reality in a court built on spectacle. She crosses to a dummy draped in a half-finished gown. The neckline plunges lower than convention. She touches the edge, eyes glinting. "This will be worn with a cross," she says. "Then no one can call it immodest." You smile to yourself. That's the 3rd joke you've caught tonight. She uses irony the way other people use lace, as trim on serious business. The mistress beckons an older seamstress to bring forward a chest. Inside are scraps of older gowns, fragments of embroidery, tiny relics of past seasons. She sorts through them, pulling out a piece of faded crimson. "Never this again," she murmurs. "Too much blood." The seamstress nods. You feel a shiver. Even in a world of silks, the echo of violence seeps through. A breeze from the window stirs the fabrics, making them ripple like a field of exotic flowers. You step closer, running your fingers lightly along a bolt of velvet. It's cool, almost damp. You imagine the forests of, the ships, the sailors, the trade routes that brought this to her feet. All of empire condensed into a single fold of cloth. She turns suddenly, holding up a length of pale green shot with silver. "This," she says, "this is hope." An attendant writes it down. Tomorrow, hope will shimmer across ball gowns and draperies, and everyone will pretend it was their idea. In a corner, a court poet jots lines about threads of destiny and loom of fortune. He's trying to capture what you're seeing, power woven into fabric. He'll probably recite it at supper, and everyone will nod sagely, unaware that the mistress has already chosen her next weave. You recall a mainstream historical fact. In England, Nell's adoption of looser, stage-inspired gowns filtered upward into aristocratic fashion, softening stiff bodices. A commoner actress reshaping elite dress. Historians still debate whether this was conscious rebellion or simply comfort. The mistress here seems to know exactly what she's doing. Another quirky tidbit. Some mistresses commissioned mourning silks months before a death was announced, signaling inside knowledge of political shifts. A certain shade of black could trigger panic in the stockrooms of. You wonder how many spies watch the of her ribbons for clues. She sits again, this time at a small writing desk covered with swatches. She dips a quill into ink and sketches a quick diagram, a sleeve cut, a pleat. She seals it with wax and hands it to a courier. Somewhere beyond the palace, will receive it and begin weaving the season's destiny. The hall quiets as the mistress rises for the last time. She sweeps a length of silk over her arm like a general picking up a banner. "Enough," she says. Instantly, tailors bow, merchants withdraw, attendants gather the leftovers. She walks out, leaving behind a room heavy with the scent of scorched wool, crushed silk, and ambition. You follow her into the corridor, blinking at the change in light. The palace seems to exhale. Behind you, doors close on the looms and scissors. Ahead of you, the mistress's gown, for tonight's still relatively simple, flares as she turns a corner. Tomorrow it will be different, and with it, the entire court. You've just walked through a battlefield without swords, where fabrics, cuts, and daring necklines broadcast power long before any decree is written. You glide deeper into the palace as if on a polished ribbon of marble, the air a faint mix of beeswax and burning pine. The corridors you've just walked through were lined with tapestries. Now the walls begin to sparkle, tiny points of light flickering like stars caught indoors. It's not magic but facets, diamonds, garnets, rubies, and pearls sewn into every surface, dangling from every throat, winking from every ear. You've stepped into the unspoken language of jewels, a courtly code as elaborate as any cipher. In this world, cut and placement speak louder than proclamations, and you're about to learn how to read it. A lady passes, her collar stiff with seed pearls that look innocent enough until you remember a whisper from an earlier corridor. Pearls mean tears, but in the right arrangement, they also signal virginity reclaimed, or at least convincingly performed. Historians still argue whether this association began as a moral warning or a clever marketing tactic by Mediterranean traders. Either way, the mistress who wears them tonight is sending a message. I may not be your wife, but I am pure enough to wear your heir's hopes around my neck. You catch yourself smirking at the audacity. The code isn't subtle, it's practically shouted in satin. Another figure drifts by, her gown a shade of deep blue so dark it almost swallows the candlelight. Around her throat rests a choker studded with sapphires, blue, the of loyalty. Yet everyone knows she has just switched allegiances from one faction to another. That's the joke, you think, a bit of gem-set sarcasm at a rival's expense. You can almost hear the tick-style voiceover, when you betray the duke but still wear his sapphires. In this palace, irony sparkles as brightly as any stone. You pause near a carved screen and take in the bigger picture. Jewels are not just decoration here, they're tools of diplomacy. The mistress who receives a necklace heavy with emeralds is expected to remember that green is the of fertility, of growth, of new political alliances sprouting in secret. Presenting her with such a piece can be a way of hinting at a treaty in the making or a marriage to be arranged. In a court where letters are intercepted and servants double as spies, a gem can say what a tongue dares not. A courtier leans close, pretending to adjust his sleeve, and murmurs a story about a particularly daring code from a few decades back. Tiny cameos carved with miniature scenes hidden inside pendants, so small you'd need a magnifying glass to see them. One showed a ship leaving harbor, an instruction to an admiral. Another depicted two clasped hands, the old symbol of a secret pact. Imagine texting with rubies, he jokes softly, and you nearly laugh out loud at the mental image of a row of mistresses holding up gemstone necklaces like glittering smartphones, composing their silent messages one pendant at a time. But the power of these jewels isn't only in secrecy, it's also in spectacle. When the king appears at a masquerade wearing a collar of black diamonds, a rarity so extreme that some guests wonder if they're merely smoky quartz, she isn't just making a fashion statement. She's warning the queen, the ministers, the whole court. I can command stones the earth itself barely yields. Historians still debate whether black diamonds in Europe at this time were real or a clever invention of dye and lighting. Either way, the effect is the same. Jaws drop, tongues wag, and influence spreads like perfume. You think back to your own world, to influencers flaunting limited edition sneakers or a new handbag drop. The parallel is uncanny. A royal mistress, much like a modern celebrity, uses scarcity to generate desire, desire to generate imitation, and imitation to generate power. Even the copycats, ladies of lesser rank wearing paste jewels or tinted glass serve her interests because every imitation whispers the same thing. She set the trend first. And yet there's risk in this glitter. A misplaced and ill-timed gift can destroy a reputation. There's a story, half legend, half footnote, about a mistress who wore a necklace of red spinels just as the king was planning an execution. Red, of course, meant passion, but it also evoked blood. Flew that she had urged him on. The public turned. Pamphlets sketched her as a harpy dripping crimson stones like drops of guilt. Historians still argue whether she actually influenced the death warrant. Your unseen guide murmurs in your ear. But the damage to her image was real. You shiver, feeling the chill of jewels as both an weapon. You move on, passing a display of rings and brooches laid out for the night's entertainment. Some are obvious, hearts, crowns, fleur-de-lis, but others look like nonsense shapes until you tilt them in the light. Then a pattern emerges, a tiny bee, a star, a crescent moon. These are the emojis of the age, instantly to insiders. A bee might signal industry or a reminder of a poem. A moon could hint at a nocturnal rendezvous. And because these symbols are layered with meaning, deniability remains. Oh, it's just a pretty bee, she can claim, even as every gossip at court knows it's a sting in disguise. There's a quirky tidbit you overhear from an old servant polishing silver near the wall. Some mistresses even sprinkled crushed gemstones into their drinks, believing it increased vitality or, more dramatically, guaranteed loyalty. Powdered ruby in wine, he chuckles, worth a small estate and probably did nothing but grit their teeth. Yet the of it mattered. To sip a jewel is to become, for a moment, a jewel yourself, untouchable, radiant, rare. Your own senses start to overload with all this glitter. Candle flames refract in 1,000 facets, casting rainbows across your path. The air feels heavier here, as if infused with the weight of all these stones and the secrets they've absorbed. You brush your fingers along a velvet drape and feel something sewn into the hem, a line of tiny seed pearls, hidden from view, but adding just enough weight to make the curtain fall perfectly. Even the architecture wears you. The palace is dressed up like a mistress too. A memory surfaces from earlier in the night. Crocodile dung sunscreen. You smile at the callback. If women were willing to smear such concoctions on their skin to mimic the radiance of youth, why wouldn't they also pin coated stones to their bodices to mimic the radiance of power? In this court, the difference between alchemy and accessory is only a matter of presentation. You slip into a side chamber, smaller and quieter, where a waits with his tools. He's filing a clasp, his hand steady, his eyes quick. He nods to you and whispers about his real role, not just making ornaments but managing risk. Every gem I set can change a life, he says. I choose a slightly paler sapphire here, a deeper emerald there, and suddenly the whole message reads differently. He's like a typesetter of brilliance, arranging letters in a sparkling script only a few can read. His clientele, mistresses who understand that style without subtlety is just glitter, but style with codes is power. Another whisper, another anecdote. The queen herself once borrowed a necklace from a mistress, wore it publicly, and thereby claimed the message as her own. It was a coup of semiotics, a theft not of stones but of meaning. From then on, the two women's wardrobes became, each gem a paragraph in a silent debate. You imagine the tension at court, everyone scanning jewels the way you'd scroll a feed, looking for the latest update in the ongoing saga. As the night deepens, the crowd thins. The mistress you've been following all evening appears again, this time without her entourage. She pauses under a chandelier, and for a heartbeat you see the code laid bare. Diamonds at her throat, clarity, a single green tourmaline at her heart, hope, and tiny black pearls woven into her hair, mystery. It's a whole manifesto of desire, loyalty, and challenge expressed without a single word. You can't help but admire the audacity. Tomorrow pamphleteers will sketch her outfit, lesser ladies will copy her, and merchants will scramble to import whatever stone she's made famous overnight. The cycle continues. You find yourself exhaling slowly, as if matching the rhythm of the candle flames. The palace hums faintly, wind through distant halls, a muted lute somewhere far off. The jewels glimmer but no longer startle you. You're beginning to read the language fluently, its syntax of sparkle, its grammar of glint. And as you drift toward the next room, you the power of this knowledge. Not just to watch, but to anticipate, to understand who is rising, who is falling, who is plotting under the guise of glitter. Somewhere ahead, fabrics rustle, a promise of the next lesson, perhaps about how cloth and cut extend this same code from necklines to hems. But for now you linger in the afterimage of jewels, the palace a constellation around you, each mistress a planet exerting her pull with stones instead of scepters. You drift away from the jewel-lit corridor into a chamber filled with the faint hiss of curling irons heating over coals and the rustle of combs through hair. The perfume of beeswax and scorched tresses wraps around you like a cloud. This is the backstage of power, the dressing rooms where royal mistresses transform their heads into billboards, hiding places, and sometimes battlefields. You are surrounded by monumental coiffures, towers of hair that could rival the spires of the chapel you passed earlier. A maid darts past you, balancing a tray of hairpins like a soldier carrying arrows. She whispers about poufs, giant structures of teased hair, cushions, and horsehair pads over which the mistress's real locks are draped. Each one is a sculpture. You lean closer to one under construction and see the scaffolding of ribbons and wires, like the frame of a tiny suspension bridge. Historians still argue whether these hairstyles began as a practical way to display jewels or as a sly form of satire on the very notion of gravity and decorum. Either way, they became the Instagram reels of their age, impossible to ignore, impossible not to copy. Tonight, one mistress sits as three attendants fuss around her, stacking layer upon layer until her head seems almost to scrape the carved ceiling. Into this living tower they are weaving props, a silk ship with full rigging to commemorate a naval victory, a spray of waxed flowers to signal spring's arrival, and so the gossip goes, a tiny scroll hidden beneath a bow. It's a note for a general waiting in the antechamber. Imagine air dropping through your hair, you mutter under your breath, and the nearest maid stifles a giggle. Hair is more than decoration here. It's a broadcasting platform. A poof shaped like a broken column might mourn a lost ally. A braid threaded with black ribbons might hint at a clandestine funeral. When the king's appears at supper with a miniature birdcage balanced atop her curls, the message is clear to every courtier. She holds someone important captive, politically, emotionally, or both. Historians still argue whether the ship poofs at court were political statements or just fashionable excess, your unseen guide murmurs. But in this palace, nothing on a mistress's head is accidental. You're drawn to the tools of this art. Ivory combs carved with tiny nymphs, boar bristle brushes polished by years of use, little puffs of powder that smell faintly of lavender and something stranger. A maid tells you the secret ingredient, ground rice mixed with lead or even powdered bone to get the right chalky hue. Quirky, dangerous, and effective, the perfect courtly trifecta. Some mistresses, she says, sprinkle crushed herbs into the powder to ward off headaches or, more fancifully, to transmit coded scents to lovers leaning in close. As you watch, a second mistress arrives, her hair already towering but unfinished. Her attendants unroll a thin ribbon painted with tiny words, not readable at a distance but clear enough to an intimate observer. They weave it in spirals around her curls. By the time they're done, her hairstyle will be a literal text, a poem circling her head like an orbit. You think of scrolling headlines on modern screens and laugh softly. Nothing new under the sun except the medium. There's a story whispered by one of the older stylists, part legend, part footnote. A daring mistress once used her hair to smuggle state papers out of the palace. Folded tightly, sealed with wax, slipped into a hollow comb at the back of her coiffure, the note traveled across the border before anyone thought to search her head. They checked her shoes, the stylist chuckles, but never her curls. Whether true or not, the anecdote illustrates the same point. Hair is a hiding place as well as a stage. You catch the scent of pomade, a heavy mixture of bare fat, musk, and citrus oil. The stylist dips her fingers and smooths it over a mass of curls, sculpting like a potter with clay. She explains that certain scents become signatures. A mistress might choose orange blossom one week, violet the next, signaling moods or alliances as surely as any jewel. One quirky tidbit: a few have started adding powdered chocolate to their hair for the smell, leaving a trail of sweetness in their wake. Historians still argue whether chocolate hair was a fad or a personal quirk, she shrugs. Either way, people noticed. Your fingers itch to touch the towering constructions, but you resist. They're delicate, even dangerous. A misplaced pin can trigger a collapse, like pulling the wrong stick from a game of pickup sticks. A toppled poof can ruin not just a hairstyle, but a whole evening's political choreography. There are tales, whispered with glee, of rivals accidentally brushing against a mistress and sending her headpiece tilting, the coded message lost in a spill of powder. In a court where every gesture is, sabotage can be as simple as a nudge. You notice the contrast between public and private. In her chambers, a mistress might loosen her hair, revealing its true length and texture, far less formal than the public tower. There's intimacy in seeing a powerful woman with her hair down, a glimpse behind the curated image. Yet even that privacy can be. A lover invited to watch her unpin the poof might be made to feel special, included in the backstage of power, while actually being just another audience member in a carefully scripted show. A maid brings over a mirror framed in gilt. You look into it and catch your own reflection surrounded by the bustle of stylists, powders, and pins. For a moment you imagine yourself with a towering poof, a ribbon carrying your own secret message. Perhaps, help me escape this history binge looping around your curls. You chuckle quietly. In this ASMR hush, the land's soft as a feather. Beyond fashion, hair also shapes policy. A mistress who a certain style creates demand for powders, pomades, ribbons, and ornaments. Entire industries bloom around a single poof. Perfumers invent new scents, milliners design taller hats, even carriage makers adjust roof heights to accommodate higher hair. Historians still argue how much of 18th century trade policy was indirectly driven by women's hairstyles, your guide whispers. But shipments of rice powder and imported ribbons did spike in those years. It's an economy built on curls. You move closer to one of the finished creations. Up close, the hair is like a cityscape. Boulevards of braids, plazas of powder, tiny figurines perched like statues. It's absurd and magnificent. You can almost hear the rustle of gossip traveling through it, the tiny scroll hidden in a bow, the scent signaling an alliance. It's a wearable network, a soft architecture of influence. The mistress smiles faintly at you as if to say, "Yes, I know you're decoding me." Then she turns her head, and the whole construction catches the candlelight, glowing like a sunrise atop her skull. The night wears on. Attendants sweep the floor of fallen powder and stray pins. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying faint music from a distant hall. The mistresses rise, their heads crowned, messages embedded, scents chosen. They will glide into the ballroom like walking billboards, their hair not just an accessory but a broadcast, a hiding place, a weapon. And you, drifting behind them, will read the headlines written in curls and ribbons. As you follow them toward the next chamber, you catch yourself exhaling slowly, matching the sway of their steps. The palace feels softer now, the edges blurred by powder in the air. You're learning the code, jewels first, now hair, and with each secret decoded you feel less like an outsider and more like a silent participant in this glittering game. Somewhere ahead, fabrics rustle and music swells. Another lesson waits, but for now you float in the perfume and powder, a spectator to hair towers carrying hidden messages, knowing that tomorrow pamphleteers will sketch these silhouettes, and copycats will begin building their own mini messages atop their heads. You drift out of the powder-fogged dressing chambers and into a hall alive with sound and scent. The hum of conversation swells into a chorus of clinking glasses, lute strings, and low laughter. Candlelight pools in silver dishes. The air is thick with roast spices, sugar, and a whisper of musk from the mistresses' perfumes. After jewels and hair towers, this is the third arena of influence you're being ushered through. The banquets and salons where taste itself is dictated, quite literally. Your slippered feet slide across parquet floors polished to a mirror shine. You pass a pair of footmen bearing a tureen so massive you could bathe a small dog in it. Steam curls up in lazy spirals carrying the smell of cinnamon and venison. At the center of the room, tables stretch like runways, each one staged as carefully as a fashion shoot. Silver candelabra rise between platters of sculpted marzipan. You catch yourself smiling. In a sense, these are edible hashtags, trends you can taste. A mistress enters to murmurs of approval. She wears a gown of pale apricot silk. You notice it because it echoes the glaze on the pheasant being served. Nothing is coincidental. Her choice of the menu, the music, even the flowers in the arrangements have been orchestrated to reinforce a mood, a policy, a whisper of alliance. At Versailles in the late 17th century, Madame really did control not only the king's affections, but also his menus, introducing new dishes spiced with exotic ingredients from the colonies. Historians still argue whether she used these culinary choices to signal support for certain trading companies, or simply to keep the court excited and distracted. Either way, the effect was the same. Taste buds trained to her beat. You slip into a chair near the edge, letting your senses drink everything in. A page glides past with a tray of tiny porcelain cups filled with a dark, bitter liquid. Coffee. The court is just discovering it, and already mistresses are staking claims. One leans in to whisper that she prefers chocolate thicker, a little scandalous, and soon her followers will switch to that too. You think of modern influencers pushing branded energy drinks. Different century, same tactic. At the far end of the hall, a small orchestra is tuning. Not the heavy, solemn music of state occasions, but a lighter, lilting sound, violins, flutes, a harpsichord. The mistress who sponsors tonight's salon has hired a young composer no one has heard of yet, and by morning everyone will. Patronage is power. A single aria sung in her presence can launch a career or bury a rival's hopes. The courtiers may pretend to come for the food, but they stay for the playlist. Your gaze drifts over the table. Swans reformed from their own meat posed mid-flight. Sugar sculptures of mythological scenes. Candied violets dusted with gold. A quirky tidbit you overhear from a kitchen boy. Some mistresses commission marzipan likenesses of their political enemies and have them served sliced at dessert, a sweet little act of symbolic revenge. The boy grins, showing a gap in his teeth. It's just almonds and sugar, he shrugs, but everyone gets the joke. You lean back, watching servants refill goblets with wine so pale it's almost silver. The mistresses sip delicately, knowing each choice is noted. Burgundy or champagne, exotic pineapple or humble apple. A preference can align you with a faction, a region, a policy. Even the way a dish is eaten can be a signal. You recall reading that Medici brought forks from Italy to France and changed table manners forever. Here, a mistress can shift an entire dining culture overnight. The music begins. Couples rise, skirts whispering, shoes gliding. This is no random dance, but a new pattern devised by a dancing master under the mistress's patronage. Each step teaches hierarchy. Who bows first, who turns last, who gets to lead. The choreography is a social map. You notice how the mistress at the center performs a slightly different variation, a signature flourish only she is permitted. Tomorrow, younger ladies will practice it in their chambers, trying to mimic her timing. Historians still argue how far these court dances influenced political negotiations. Your unseen guide murmurs. But letters from ambassadors mention them as often as treaties. You catch another scent, nutmeg and cloves, imported at vast expense. A cook wheels out a pie so large 4 men must carry it. As they cut into the crust, a flock of tiny live birds bursts out, flapping around the hall in a flurry of feathers and squeals. It's a spectacle straight from nursery rhymes, but here it's real. The mistress laughs, a sound like a silver bell. The message is clear. She can afford whimsy on a grand scale. You laugh too, quietly thinking. This is basically an unboxing video with feathers. Around the edges of the hall, smaller rooms open into private salons. Here the mistresses' real work happens away from the spectacle, in murmured conversations over sherbet or ices. You peek into one and see a map spread on a low table, pins marking colonies, routes, and supply chains. A merchant kneels, explaining shipments of sugar and cocoa. The mistress nods, tasting a spoonful of iced fruit, her expression unreadable. In these salons, menus and music are just the bait. Policy is the catch. You're offered a slice of something glistening with sugar. You taste it, delicate, perfumed, laced with. The servant whispers it's a recipe brought from the Ottoman court, here by a mistress who once entertained an ambassador with it. Now the dish is all the rage, and spice traders are making fortunes. Quirky detail. Some ladies claim the dessert is an aphrodisiac. Others say it wards off melancholy. Historians still argue whether that's placebo or trade propaganda, your guide notes. But it's sold a lot of. Music swells again, a new composition. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The rhythm is different from anything you've heard earlier tonight, a syncopation that makes your heart skip. The composer bows to the mistress after each movement. You're witnessing the birth of a trend that will ripple out through Europe, by lesser courts, printed by music publishers, taught to young ladies at the clavier. All because one mistress decided she liked this sound. You open your eyes and watch the dancers. The candles cast soft halos, powder from their hair drifts down like fairy dust. The floor becomes a moving tapestry of silks, velvets, and brocades. In a corner, a tiny mechanical automaton shaped like a bird hops along a table pecking crumbs. Another quirky tidbit you overhear. The mistress imported it from Augsburg as a curiosity. Soon, every noble wants one. Rejoice. Influence travels not just through grand gestures, but through little novelties. As the night deepens, the tone softens. Guests drift into the salons for chocolate and gossip. The orchestra switches to a slower air, almost a lullaby. You breathe in, feeling sugar and spice settle in your lungs like dust. You think of how everything you've seen tonight, menus, dances, devices, even jokes, will be echoed tomorrow in towns you've never heard of. The mistress doesn't just host, she broadcasts. You glance back at the main hall. Servants clear platters, scrape wax from candlesticks, sweep feathers from the floor. The spectacle dissolves, leaving traces of scent and sound. Somewhere a clock chimes. You're still gliding behind the mistress, still reading the code of her world. Jewels first, hair next, now taste and sound. Each arena of influence overlaps, a lattice of soft power woven with sugar, powder, and melody. The mistress pauses at a doorway and looks over her shoulder, as if she senses your invisible presence. Her smile is faint, conspiratorial. She raises a cup of chocolate to her lips and you catch the aroma. Cinnamon, vanilla, something darker. It's both invitation and challenge. Tomorrow, the pamphleteers will draw her as the queen of fashion, the arbiter of taste. Merchants will scramble to stock whatever she ate, composers to print whatever she heard, dancing masters to teach whatever she stepped. Tonight you've seen how power tastes and sounds before it is ever written into law. You leave the echo of violins and the aftertaste of cinnamon behind and step into a smaller, dimmer gallery. The air is cooler here, but at the same time thicker, as if it has weight texture. It wraps around you in layers, not of fabric but of fragrance. In the world you've been moving through, after jewels and hair and banquets, scent is the next weapon. Mistresses wield it like a blade so fine you never see it coming. You inhale and feel stories bloom behind your eyes. A lady glides past and a breeze of orange blossom follows her. Another drifts closer, and you're hit with frankincense and myrrh, like a cathedral condensed into a breath. You're not just smelling perfume, you're reading a code. The court is a library of scents. Each mistress writes her chapter on your skin, and you walk away branded. You probably won't survive this olfactory battlefield if you're allergic, you think with a sleepy grin. Mainstream fact floats into your mind. Medici brought her personal perfumer, from Florence to France in the 16th century, and turned fragrance into a political art. She even had secret laboratories built under her residence to concoct new scents. Historians still argue whether those underground rooms were for simple perfumery or for poison. The line between the two was perilously thin. Either way, she proved that perfume could shape memory, loyalty, even fear. Your slippered feet whisper across tiles painted with faded flowers. You pause near a table where dozens of tiny crystal flacons sparkle under candlelight like captured rain. Each one holds a different story. You pick one up, open it, and a rush of musk and ambergris rises, the ocean and the hunt pressed into a single drop. Quirky tidbit you overhear from a gossiping valet. Ambergris, that prized base note, is actually a waxy lump excreted by sperm whales and aged by the sea. Romantic, isn't it? He smirks. You choke back a laugh. You've just been wearing whale vomit. A mistress enters the room with her entourage. Her gown is pale green, but her aura is all tuberose and cloves. As she passes, people lean subtly closer, breathing in. Scent in this world is a social media feed without words. You don't need to announce your presence if your fragrance arrives a few seconds before you do. The mistress knows it. She lets her trail linger like a signature on the air. Tomorrow, apothecaries in Paris will be asked for whatever she was wearing. You notice pomanders dangling from belts and wrist chains, little pierced silver orbs filled with aromatic herbs, resins, and sometimes secret notes. In a crowded, not always washed court, they're both hygiene and signal. One mistress keeps a pomander shaped like a tiny skull. Another carries one shaped like a dove. A servant whispers that sometimes the balls hold folded letters steeped in scent, so a lover them without opening. Inhaling becomes reading. You drift toward a window where a bowl of fresh herbs sits. Mint, rosemary, lavender. Courtiers pluck sprigs to crush between their fingers. A footman explains that certain herbs clear the head or open the heart. Historians still argue how much of that was early aromatherapy and how much was placebo, but either way, it gave mistresses a way to administer mood shifts without words. A whiff of this before a petition, a waft of that before a dance. In another corner, a tiny brazier glows. Someone tosses pellets of resin onto it and smoke curls upward, carrying scent through the gallery. The mistress presiding tonight learned the trick from Ottoman envoys, burning oud, benzoin, and rare woods in patterns timed to the conversation. As the fragrance changes, so does the topic. You think of modern restaurants diffusing signature scents to manipulate appetite. Different century, same marketing. A maid offers you a handkerchief. It's soft, embroidered with a cipher and soaked in violet water. You press it to your face and inhale. Instantly, memories of your grandmother's garden bloom, even though you've never told anyone about it. That's the magic these women understand. Smell bypasses reason and goes straight to memory. One dab on a pulse point and you're halfway home. You peek into a side chamber lined with shelves of glass jars. It looks like an apothecary and a candy shop combined. Dried petals, chunks of resin, little vials in looping script. Civet, storax, narrowly, bergamot. A young perfumer stirs something in a copper pot. The mistress sits nearby, testing blotters of paper like an artist choosing paint. She's composing a fragrance not for herself, but for the king's next treaty meeting. The top notes say fresh start, the heart notes sweet accord, the base, we're not to be underestimated. Diplomacy in liquid form. A quirky story the perfumer tells you in a whisper. One famous mistress once had a gown's hem soaked in jasmine oil so that as she walked, the heat of her body released fragrance for hours. It was her way of entering a room before she physically did. Soon everyone wanted scented hems. Tailors cursed, perfumers rejoiced. You can't help thinking of today's signature scents and celebrity perfumes. They're echoes of this old game. The mistress you're shadowing tonight lifts her pomander, opens it, and lets a pinch of powder fall into a cup of wine. You blink. Is that normal? She catches your eye, though you're supposed to be invisible, and smiles faintly. Just cinnamon and iris root, she seems to say. You remember Medici's underground labs and wonder. Historians still argue indeed. The air is now a tapestry of notes, resinous, floral, citrus. You walk through it like through a memory palace. Each scent cues an image, a hunt, a dance, a promise. You feel drowsy but alert, as if your senses are being played like an instrument. That's the point. Mistresses don't just wear perfume, they choreograph experiences. By the time you leave a salon, you're imprinted. You watch as servants hand out little cones of perfumed powder to guests to dab on their wigs. Someone sprinkles into the air with a silver sprinkler shaped like a swan. The droplets catch candlelight like stars. A courtier jokes about smelling like a bouquet, but still takes a handful. Tomorrow he'll ask his valet to get the same mix. Influence travels by nose. Through another door you glimpse a still room, a private laboratory where herbs are steeped and oils distilled. Copper alembics glint, steam hisses. This is where the real power lies, you think. Not just in wearing a scent, but in owning the recipe. Some formulas are guarded like state secrets. A mistress who controls a perfumer controls a pipeline of desire. You sit on a cushioned bench and watch the swirl of gowns and scents. Someone passes with a whiff of violet and leather, someone else with rose and smoke. It's like watching in the dark. Your head tilts back. The ceiling above is painted with flowers and bees, as if echoing the invisible garden below. You breathe in, slow and deep, feeling the fragrances settle in layers on your skin like invisible jewels. You think back to the banquet hall, the sugar, the spices, the music. Here, scent ties it all together. A dish, a dance, a perfume, a policy. Mistresses know you won't remember a speech, but you will remember how it smelled. Even centuries later, scholars open old letters and catch faint whiffs of violet water or musk, ghosts of influence lingering on paper. As the evening winds down, attendants bring bowls of scented water for guests to rinse their hands. Lemon, rose, a hint of mint. The mistress stands near the doorway, her own signature fragrance unmistakable even now. She's sending everyone home marked, like bees dusted with pollen. Tomorrow they'll carry her mood, her memory, her message into every corner of court. You rise and follow her out, senses saturated. You've just walked through a world painted in scent, power without a crown, influence without a word. Behind you the still room doors close with a soft click. Ahead, another corridor opens, promising more layers of this hidden kingdom of taste and style. You inhale one last time, catching a whisper of something new, perhaps the first note of the next trend. You follow the last curl of perfume down a corridor so narrow your shoulders brush velvet draperies. The music, the laughter, the clatter of plates fade behind you. Ahead is a hush so deep you can hear the faint crackle of fire behind a door. This is the real arena of power now, not the ballroom or the banquet, but the room you're about to slip into, where voices are low and the air is thick with secrets. A liveried servant glances both ways, then opens the door just enough for you to slide through. Instantly the atmosphere changes. Candlelight is dimmer, chairs lower, softer. Instead of hundreds of people, there are 10. Instead of music, there's a slow rhythm of whispered conversation, punctuated by the clink of porcelain cups. This is where mistresses shape policy the way they shaped menus and scents, quietly, conversationally, one pulse at a time. You sink onto a velvet stool at the edge, invisible but listening. The mistress you've been shadowing all night sits near the fireplace. Her hair, still scented with tuberose, is loosened now. Her gown is simpler, though the fabric still whispers of wealth. Around her are ministers, poets, envoys, and 2 young officers whose eyes flick nervously between their boots and her smile. Everyone's guard drops a notch here. Pillow talk is not just for lovers, it's a style of diplomacy. Mainstream historical fact floats into your drowsy mind. Madame de Pompadour, official mistress of Louis XVI, held informal meetings in her private apartments where foreign ambassadors were invited to tea rather than audience halls. Historians still argue whether the real policies of the 7 years, war, were hatched in those gilded salons rather than in the king's council chamber. Either way, Pompadour's ability to gather men of state in a space designed for intimacy made her one of the most influential women of her century. A maid brings in a tray of tiny pastries. Everyone reaches for them without thinking. You notice the pattern, a question asked just as a bite is taken, a suggestion murmured as a goblet is lifted. It's easier to nod when your mouth is full, easier to agree when your hands are warm. The mistress has mastered timing like a musician. The conversation flows like the chocolate she pours into cups, dark and thick, laced with spices. You think of modern, off-site retreats, where decisions get made over golf games rather than board tables. Different century, same tactic. In one corner, a poet recites a few lines, not a public performance but a test. Will the mistress like it? If she does, it will circulate. If she doesn't, it will die here in this quiet room. Words are currency. Even jokes are bartered. A quirky tidbit you overhear. One trick at these private gatherings is to hide a question inside a poem or song lyric, so only the intended listener catches it. Like passing notes in class but with Alexandrins. You glance around. The furnishings are low tables, cushions, embroidered screens. On one screen, a painted garden with birds, on another, mythological lovers. It's a visual cue. Here you may speak freely like in a pastoral idyll, even though you're in the heart of a palace. The mistress leans closer to one guest, laughing softly, her hand brushing his sleeve. He flushes. You watch as she slides a folded paper across the table with one finger. He covers it with his palm as if by accident. Pillow talk, paper talk, the two blur. A clock ticks somewhere. Time feels slower here. No rigid protocol, no trumpets. People address each other by first names, even nicknames. The mistress uses this to build webs of loyalty. When she later supports someone in public, it seems like spontaneous kindness. In reality, the groundwork was laid here, over candied fruit and murmurs. You're offered a seat closer to the hearth. You can smell beeswax and faint smoke from the logs. The mistress is telling a story about a hunting trip, her voice low, eyes bright. She's not just entertaining, she's framing a policy issue about forestry rights in the guise of an anecdote. Historians still argue how much storytelling diplomacy influenced early modern legislation, but letters from ministers show they remembered her parables long after they forgot official memos. A cat jumps onto the mistress's lap. She strokes it absently. Another quirky tidbit from the maid at your elbow. The cat wears a collar studded with tiny sapphires given by a foreign duke. Every time she scratches its chin, he knows. The maid whispers with a grin. You blink, a living courier of sentiment, a furry hashtag. The conversation drifts to music, then to taxes, then to who will host the next masquerade. Each shift is smooth, guided by the mistress like a dancer leading a partner. She never raises her voice. You sense that decisions are being made, who will be appointed, which poet will get a pension, which envoy will be. Nothing is written down, yet tomorrow the court will move accordingly, as if by invisible strings. Someone produces a small lute and begins to strum. The mistress sings a few lines under her breath. The officers lean in, enchanted. In that moment she has their loyalty sealed with melody. You think of how today's leaders use informal podcasts or dinners to humanize themselves. The medium changes, the soft power of conversation does not. The fire pops, shadows dance on the walls. A servant refills cups with a pale herbal infusion said to clear the mind. It smells of lemon balm and thyme. Historians still argue whether such infusions had any real effect or simply served as ritual cues. We're in the thinking phase now. Either way, everyone sips and nods more thoughtfully. The mistress shifts topics to art commissions. She describes a new ceiling she wants painted in the chapel. As she speaks, she glances at the envoy from Florence. He beams, his cousin is a painter. Without a contract or a decree, a future is decided over a casual remark. You see how lives are steered in this low-lit room. You lean back against the wall, letting the murmur wash over you. It's warm, intimate, hypnotic. You almost forget the grand halls outside. Here, everyone is just a person with a cup in hand and a secret in their heart. Yet the ripples from this quiet space will shape armies, taxes, fashions. Soft power, soft cushions. The mistress's cat hops down and stretches. The poet recites another couplet. Someone yawns. It's late, but no one wants to leave first. To be invited here is to be chosen. To linger is to hope for a whisper of. When at last people rise, they do so reluctantly as if waking from a dream. Handshakes are warmer, promises more sincere. Tomorrow, in public, these same people will bow stiffly and speak formally, but tonight they've been bound by a softer thread. As they depart, the mistress remains by the fire, gazing into the embers. She has spoken little, yet guided much. You sense she's aware of you, too, your silent witness. She lifts her cup in a small salute, a glint of in her eyes. You've seen jewels, hair, banquets sent. Now you've seen words used like silk, wrapping power in warmth. Outside, the corridors await, but you're not ready to leave this hush just yet. You breathe in beeswax, spice, and secrets, letting it settle like a blanket around your shoulders. You step back into the corridor, leaving the hush of whispered promises behind, and at first you think you're alone. But then you hear a different sound, the echo of your own footsteps expanding into a space so vast it swallows them whole. Gone are the velvet draperies and secretive screens. Now there is marble, gilt, fresco. This is where soft words are turned into hard stone. Mistresses know that to make power last beyond the evening you have to build it, paint it, stage it. You emerge into a courtyard drenched in moonlight. Columns rise like pale trunks of a petrified forest. A fountain sends up a slender arc of water perfumed with herbs. On its edge sits a statue of the mistress herself, not literally, of course, but as a nymph from Ovid, her features softened yet unmistakable. You're standing inside a manifesto carved in stone. Your slippered feet crunch on gravel as you walk. Servants are still awake, moving scaffolding, carrying brushes, arranging flowers. The mistress is commissioning a gallery, a garden, whatever shape her imagination and influence can take. Mainstream historical fact drifts to you. Madame Pompadour was not only Louis XV's confidant but also a major patron of the arts, backing painters like Boucher and building her own at Bellevue. Historians still argue whether her support of Rococo style was simply personal taste or a calculated way to soften the monarchy's image during turbulent times. Either way, her choices changed what France looked like. You pass through an arched doorway into a hall where painters are at work by candlelight. They're frescoing a ceiling with clouds and cherubs. The mistress strolls below, pointing with a gloved finger, suggesting a change here, a shift in there. Her voice is low but decisive. Tomorrow this ceiling will host a diplomatic reception, and every figure will be a cue. The cherubs may hold olive branches or spears depending on what message she wants to send. A quirky tidbit you overhear from a weary painter. One mistress insisted on being painted into a mythological scene as Aurora bringing the dawn, but with a tiny lapdog at her feet so everyone would know it was really her. Later, the lapdog became a fashionable accessory at court. You smile. Branding, 17th century style. You keep walking. The air smells of plaster dust and orange trees. In the garden beyond, landscapers are laying out intricate parterres shaped like monograms. From above, say, from the window of the king's chambers, the mistress's initials will bloom in flowers each spring. It's a risk and a statement. She's etching her presence into the landscape. The mistress appears beside you, cloaked but unmistakable. She gestures for you to follow. You glide through a half-finished, velvet seats, painted flats showing Arcadian scenes, ropes and pulleys dangling like spider silk. Here she plans to debut a new ballet that celebrates virtue rewarded, but casts her own family's coat of arms in the hero's crest. Tomorrow's gossip will call it flattering. The day after tomorrow, everyone will be humming the tunes. You notice how the craftspeople treat her, not as a guest but as a patron. They bow, but they also listen. She has the power to grant commissions, pay wages, open doors. In a world where women often cannot hold office, this is her office. The studio, the construction site, the rehearsal hall. A stonecutter shows you a block of marble. Embedded in its surface is a fossil, a curled shell from an ancient sea. He winks, nature's own ornament. You think how fitting something soft turned to stone, like a whisper becoming architecture. Historians still argue how far these building projects were vanity versus policy. But even if it's vanity, it's durable. A hairstyle dies with the season, lasts centuries. Inside a gallery newly hung with tapestries, you pause before one depicting a hunt. The mistress's profile is there, disguised as Diana the Huntress. Around her, animals rare and exotic, a giraffe, a peacock, a unicorn-like oryx. Quirky tidbit from a courtier. She ordered the weavers to include creatures she had only read about so that visitors would think she'd actually seen them. Why travel when you can weave? he chuckles. You think of Instagram backgrounds today. You're led into a chapel lit by 100 beeswax candles. The ceiling is a riot of angels and flowers. The scent of incense lingers, another callback to the perfumed salons. Here, art, architecture, and aroma merge. Even the hymns are newly composed under her patronage. She sits in the front pew not to pray, but to be seen praying under her own commissioned saints. You drift back outside. The moon has shifted. Shadows of statues fall differently now. Each one is part of a narrative allegory of fidelity, of plenty, of victory. People walking here tomorrow will absorb the message without noticing, just as they inhaled her perfume and ate her spiced dishes. She's built a total environment, a brand experienced centuries before the term existed. As you wander through a half-completed wing, you notice a painter adding a detail to a portrait, a faint scent bottle on the sitter's table, another callback. Even in oil paint, she's embedding her signature fragrance. Visitors centuries later will still see it, even if the smell is long gone. A bell tolls somewhere in the dark. Workers pack up their brushes, cover statues with cloth, bank the fires in the kilns. The mistress stands at a balcony looking out over the grounds. From here she can see not just her own apartments but the city beyond, the river carrying goods and gossip alike. She's not a queen, but her image is everywhere in marble, canvas, stage sets. Tomorrow ambassadors will stroll these halls, and every cornice, every ceiling, every backdrop will whisper her name. You pause at the edge of the fountain again, inhaling the herb-scented spray. It feels like a cool mist after the heat of the salons. You're beginning to understand. The jewels drew the eye, the hair drew the gasp, the banquets trained the palate, the perfumes marked the memory. The pillow talk shaped the will, and now the art and architecture fix it all in place, visible even to those who never set foot in her rooms. Above you, the sky lightens with the first hint of dawn. Workers melt away into doorways. The mistress disappears inside, leaving you alone with statues that seem to breathe. You've just walked through her gallery of influence, her of soft power. Somewhere a bird sings, maybe one of those mechanical automatons, maybe a real one. Either way, the stage is set for the next act of her story. You're still standing in the half-lit gallery when the first whisper reaches you. It doesn't come from the stone mouths of the statues, but from a human throat, a servant scurrying past, eyes down, clutching a folded pamphlet. You only catch a glimpse of the woodcut on its front, a woman in a tower surrounded by flames. The mistress's silhouette. The air seems to change temperature, as if a door has opened to a winter street. You've stepped into the other side of power, the part where admiration curdles into envy, gossip, and scandal. You follow the servant through a side door into a smaller room lined with cabinets of letters. This is the mistress's nerve center when storms break. On the desk, quills, sealing wax, a small printing press for private newsletters. A cat sleeps on a pile of pamphlets as if it's seen this all before. It probably has. Because no matter how many fountains or frescoes you commission, public opinion can pivot overnight, one unlucky, one enemy with a sharp pen, and you're suddenly a witch instead of a muse. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Madame, once Louis XIV's glittering, was implicated in the affair of the poisons in the 1670s. Historians still argue whether she actually participated in black mass rituals or whether rival courtiers fabricated the evidence to bring her down. Either way, her reputation suffered and she had to retreat from the center of power. You glance at the cat again. It blinks at you slowly as if to say, "See. This is why you always plan an exit." The mistress appears, not in silk this time, but in a darker, plainer gown. She's holding a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. She gestures for you to sit. Her voice is low, almost a whisper over velvet. They're saying things again. You can smell her perfume, subtler now, like herbs steeped in rainwater rather than the heady amber of last night. Even her scent has gone into survival mode. She begins to explain her strategy. First, control the narrative. Before the pamphlets hit the coffee houses, she writes her own version of events and has it read aloud at salons she still controls. She doesn't confront the king she arrives with a new charity project instead. Quirky tidbit. One mistress famously founded an orphanage just days after a scandal broke, effectively rebranding herself as a saint before the ink on the libels dried. You picture today's crisis management PR firms and smile. Second, build alliances outside the court. The mistress gestures to a map of Europe pinned to the wall. Tiny pins mark not battles but correspondence, bishops, playwrights, bankers, distant cousins married into other royal houses. Letters flow along these lines like blood in veins. If they shut one door, she murmurs, we walk in through another. You notice some pins are new, added just this week. Even in retreat, she's networking. Third, change the look without losing the essence. She calls it strategic modesty. Out go the low necklines and peacock, in come high collars, dove, sober jewels. It's not repentance, it's camouflage. You remember how earlier she shaped taste with daring hairstyles. Now she's shaping it again with restraint. Within a month, half the ladies at court will copy her penitent chic and make it fashionable. She walks you to a small window. Outside, carriages arrive for a clandestine supper. Only her most loyal friends are invited tonight. There's no orchestra, just a single lute, no fireworks, just candlelight. Yet you feel a different intensity. This is where survival is plotted. Around the table sit poets, ministers, two elderly duchesses, and surprisingly, a baker's widow who supplies the palace kitchens. Information travels with bread, the mistress says, pouring you a cup of spiced wine. You taste cinnamon and iron. Your heart beats a little faster. She leans closer. Never underestimate the kitchen staff, she whispers. They know who eats what and when. You think back to the perfumed banquets, the herbs in the fountain. Now the same channels carry gossip. This is the underbelly of the glittering world you walked through. Historians still argue whether mistresses wielded soft power consciously or whether it simply emerged from their survival instincts. Watching her tonight, you're convinced it's both, instinct refined into art. A servant brings a tray of folded fans. Each guest chooses one. When you open yours, you see tiny painted symbols inside, a coded message. Fans here are not just to stir the air, they're to signal alliances like silent tweets. Quirky tidbit from the baker's widow. She once baked messages into pastries for smuggling out of the palace. Nobody checks a pie, she giggles. You nearly choke on your wine. Later, in a side chamber hung with tapestries, you and the mistress walk alone. She shows you a small traveling chest packed with essentials, cash, jewels sewn into hems, letters of recommendation, a miniature portrait of the king. Always be ready to leave at dawn, she says. It's the opposite of the permanence you saw in her gardens and galleries, yet it makes sense. Power in this world is a tent, not a palace. You must be able to fold it up and carry it. A noise outside, street sellers calling the latest scandal. The mistress listens, then begins to hum a tune from last week's ballet. She's drowning out the gossip with her own melody, literally. Tomorrow she'll invite a composer to write a hymn for her orphanage project. By the time the song spreads, it will overwrite the pamphlet in people's minds. This is reputation judo. Use the opponent's force to flip the story. You feel a breeze from the window. It smells of rain and horse manure, the city beyond the palace walls. Out there, people who never seen her in person are already forming opinions. A new print shows her as a spider at the center of a web. Another shows her as a dove feeding the poor. Which one will stick? That's the gamble. She hands you a stack of letters sealed with black wax. Deliver these, she says, to friends who still matter. You tuck them under your cloak. You're part of the network now. Your footsteps echo down the corridor, past the cat still dozing on the pamphlets, past the map bristling with pins. You feel the tension between fragility and resilience. All the perfume, the jewels, the architecture, beautiful, yes, but also a shield and a weapon. As you pass a mirror, you notice your own reflection. Your clothes smell faintly of her rain herb perfume, your fingers smudged with sealing wax. Without meaning to, you're starting to look like one of her allies. It's contagious, this survival aura. Back in your room, you can still hear the city. The mistress's strategies swirl in your mind like candle smoke. Control the narrative, build alliances, shift the look, plan the exit, drown out the pamphlets with songs, hide messages in pies. Historians still argue whether these tactics actually saved reputations or merely delayed the inevitable. But tonight you've seen how a woman with no official title can improvise a whole statecraft of self-defense. The candle flickers. Outside, the first drops of rain hit the window. Somewhere in the palace, she's already drafting tomorrow's move. You pull the covers around you and breathe in the faint scent of herbs. The storm may break, but she'll dance between the raindrops as long as she can. You wake up to the muffled thud of books being unloaded. When you pull back the drape and peer out, the courtyard you crossed last night has changed again. No more secret pamphlets or hasty exits. Now it's bales of paper, crates of engravings, and rows of leather-bound tomes smelling of ink and glue. The rain has stopped, and sunlight glints off brass fittings on the boxes. You're about to see the quietest, yet perhaps deepest, layer of her power. The one built not out of fabric or perfume, but out of ideas. She appears at your shoulder with a smile that's half conspiratorial, half maternal. "Come," she whispers, "this is my real wardrobe." She leads you through an unmarked door into a gallery lined with books from floor to ceiling. Ladders on wheels creak softly as librarians glide by. The air is cool, faintly scented with cedar, a deliberate choice, she tells you, to protect paper from moths. Even here she's thought of scent as signature. You run your fingers over a spine embossed with gold. Another, a band satire printed in Amsterdam. Another, a sheaf of scores for a new opera. "These," she murmurs, "are my gowns for the mind." Mainstream historical fact drifts to you. Madame Pompadour maintained her own print workshop at Versailles, supporting Enlightenment authors, including parts of when censors hesitated. Historians still argue whether she did this out of genuine intellectual sympathy or as a tactic to manage the criticism of the crown. Either way, the books survived, carrying her imprint across Europe. She takes you to a table where engravers are bent over copper plates. They're preparing illustrations for a scientific treatise on minerals, a project she's funding anonymously. A quirky tidbit floats by from one of the engravers. The mistress insisted on adding tiny butterflies hidden in the corner of each plate, not for any scientific reason, but so she could spot pirated copies of her edition. 17th century watermarks as intellectual property protection. You grin. Around the room, men and women of letters sit in alcoves, scribbling. Some you from last night's supper, others are new. A Jesuit mathematician hunched over diagrams, a playwright murmuring rhymes, a printer's devil chasing an escaped sheet across the floor. The mistress moves among them with the ease of a hostess at a salon, but the focus of a managing editor. She comments on a line of verse, questions a footnote, chooses a marbled paper for a binding. This isn't charity, it's curation. She leads you to a corner where a globe as tall as you stands on an ebony base. Lines of voyages, some real, some speculative, crisp surface. "We lend books to sailors," she says softly, "and they bring back stories." On a shelf above, you notice a collection of shells, feathers, and a piece of volcanic glass shaped like a teardrop. "These are footnotes," she jokes. "Proof the world is bigger than the court." Her eyes glint. She's not just dressing people, she's dressing their imaginations. You climb a spiral staircase to a mezzanine where the ceiling opens to a skylight. Sunlight pours onto a long table laid with manuscripts waiting for her seal. She sits and dips a quill into ink of crushed violets. One by one she signs approvals. A translation of an Italian novella, a new method of lace-making written by a nun, a treatise on bees. You watch her hand glide across the page, turning drafts into futures. "Ideas," she murmurs, "outlive hairstyles." Below in the main hall, a group of young women in plain gowns are learning to set type. She notices your puzzled look. "Printers' apprentices," she says. "Better than embroidery." Quirky tidbit. One of these apprentices once set a sonnet upside down on purpose, creating a mirrored poem that became a fad in nearby salons. She keeps the proof in a drawer as a talisman of creative mischief. You think of memes and remix culture today. Nothing new under the sun. The mistress takes you into a smaller room hung with portraits, not of herself but of thinkers she's helped. Some famous, some obscure. "My invisible gowns," she calls them. She points to one face, a philosopher who once wrote a tract Mistresses as corrupting the monarchy. Now, she says, he dedicates his book to me. She doesn't gloat, she shrugs, as if influence is a tide that simply turns with patience and well-timed patronage. A servant enters carrying a basket of pamphlets. They're not scandals this time, but invitations to a public lecture she's sponsoring in the city on inoculation against smallpox. You can't rule a corpse, she says. Better a healthy public. You catch a faint echo of last night's survival tactics. This is another layer of self-defense, if she's associated with progress and public health, of witchcraft or poisoning look absurd. She leads you back to the main gallery where a group of composers are rehearsing a cantata dedicated to Saint. The sound is soft but luminous, like light filtering through water. You sit on a bench and let it wash over you. Music, she says, is another kind of publishing. It travels mouth to mouth. You remember the scandal songs outside the palace. Now she's seeding her own tunes to overwrite them. Historians still argue whether such patronage genuinely changed public opinion or merely created a bubble of cultured admirers. But listening to the music, you sense its power to soothe. She hands you a thin volume bound in blue. When you open it, you see your own name on the dedication page. For our guest who listens, it reads. You blink. She smiles. Everyone who passes through here leaves with a book, she says. Words are lighter than jewels, but they last longer. Downstairs, the crates you saw being unloaded are now being reloaded onto smaller carts bound for academies, convents, coffee houses. Each contains a seed, a play, a pamphlet, a print chosen and packaged under her eye. She's building a network not of pins on a map this time, but of minds in motion. As the carts roll out, you smell the mingling scents of ink, paper, cedar, and her subtle herb perfume. It's like breathing a library garden. You follow her into the last room, which looks like a simple parlor but is actually a press room. On a shelf above the press stands a row of pomanders, silver balls once filled with scent. She's repurposed them to hold printer's ink. She laughs at your raised eyebrow. Aromas fade, she says, but so do regimes. Print is slower but deeper. She picks one up, rolls it in her hand, and a faint smell of musk and iron rises. Every revolution begins with a whisper, she adds, but it survives in a footnote. As you leave the gallery, you glance back. The ladders, the skylight, the globe, the apprentice's setting type, it all feels like a hive, buzzing quietly. You've moved from her salons of glitter and music to her of ink and cedar, and you understand now why the don't stick. She's always one layer deeper than the gossip, one book ahead of the whisper. This is fashion for the mind, and you're wearing it without noticing. The corridor returns you to your guest chamber. On your pillow lies the blue book she gave you, smelling faintly of cedar and violets. Outside, the carts of books rattle away into the dawn. You can almost see the lines of influence spreading, not as perfume in a room, but as ideas in a culture. You pull the blanket over your shoulders and think of her phrase, ideas outlive hairstyles. In the hush before sleep, you suspect she's right. You open your eyes to a different rhythm, not the scratch of quills or the thud of books, but the clatter of hooves and the creak of carriage wheels arriving from far away. Outside your window, a convoy has drawn up in the courtyard. The crates this time aren't books. They're lacquer boxes from the east, bolts of silk from Venice, mirrors from Bohemia. The air carries a whiff of salt and distance. You've moved into the part of her life where fashion is no longer just a court game, but a form of foreign policy. She appears at your door in a traveling cloak lined with fur, eyes bright with anticipation. Come, she whispers, let's dress a treaty. You follow her down the grand staircase into a hall that has been transformed overnight. Gone are the cedar bookcases, in their place long tables covered with gifts, perfumes, porcelain, tapestries woven with hybrid motifs. Courtiers hover like bees around a hive. A page turns a glass hourglass slowly, as if timing something delicate. She explains in a low voice, ambassadors from a rival kingdom will arrive at noon. The king will negotiate terms of a trade agreement. But before the ministers sign anything, the mistresses of both courts will exchange tokens, a word that sounds innocent but carries the weight of centuries. In this world, silk, Scent and gesture can soften borders harder than any army. Mainstream historical fact drifts to you. In the mid-18th century, Madame Pompadour orchestrated the famous diplomatic revolution that aligned France with Austria, not just through ministerial channels but through personal relationships. She sent Marius' daughter, the future, gifts and letters advising her on French tastes. Historians still argue whether these exchanges of gowns, music and etiquette eased the way for formal treaties or were merely decorative sideshows. Either way, they became part of the machinery of diplomacy. The mistress leads you to a small side room where perfumers are blending scents for today's reception. One vial holds attar of roses from Damascus, another powdered amber from the Baltic, another something secret she won't name. "We're making a memory," she says. "They'll carry this smell home and think of us." Quirky tidbit from one of the perfumers. Last year she had a scent bottled that mimicked the aroma of freshly printed books so that foreign scholars would feel at home in her library salons. It became an unlikely hit. Back in the hall, seamstresses adjust a mannequin dressed in a gown that fuses two styles. Her own court silhouette but trimmed with lace from the visiting ambassador's homeland. "They'll see themselves reflected," she murmurs. "People are kinder to mirrors." You remember her gardens shaped into monograms. Now she's shaping clothes into bridges. Trumpets sound. The visitors arrive. Tall hats, fur-lined cloaks, accents like different instruments in an orchestra. You stand at the edge as the mistress glides forward, a moving embassy of scent, silk, and smile. She offers a small gift, a casket of pomanders filled with herbs from both countries. The other court's leading lady responds with a fan painted half in her nations, half in the host. Without a word, the room exhales. You notice details. The tablecloth is embroidered with motifs from each realm, but the centerpiece, a mechanical swan, is a marvel of French clockwork. When it moves, dipping its beak into a silver stream, everyone gasps. The mistress watches their faces. She knows astonishment is a solvent. As the ministers murmur in corners, she takes the foreign lady on a tour of her art gallery. They pause before a painting of two mythic sisters clasping hands across a river. "A gift from our king," she says, though you know she commissioned it quietly last month. They both nod. A bridge painted in oil is worth a dozen drafts of a treaty no one reads. Later, at a private tea in her apartments, you sit near the window as trays of delicate pastries appear. Each is with a spice from the visitor's homeland but shaped like a fleur-de-lis. "Taste diplomacy," she winks. Quirky tidbit from a cook. She once served a dessert with indigo to an ambassador because his flag carried blue no one else could match. The next season, Ambassador Blue became a trend at court. You watch her. She praises the visitors' musicians, invites them to perform at a future festival she's sponsoring, suggests a joint publication of folk songs. It's culture as currency, and she spends it lavishly. Historians still argue whether these gestures genuinely shifted alliances or simply decorated decisions already made in back rooms. But sitting here you sense their power. They create a mood, a story, an emotional map where signatures feel inevitable. When the guests leave, the mistress retreats to a smaller parlor with you. She unpins her elaborate coiffure, letting hair tumble like a curtain. "This is the work no one writes about," she says quietly. "Not the gowns, not the jewels, the listening." She gestures to a table covered with folded notes taken during the visit. Who liked what, who frowned at which painting, who sniffed the perfume twice. "All clues," she murmurs. "Next time we'll be ahead again." She opens a drawer and shows you a collection of small objects. A chess piece carved of amber from Prussia, a strip of embroidered ribbon from Spain, a miniature telescope from England. "Souvenir," she smiles. "Each holds a story." You lift the telescope and peer through it. The room flips upside down, but you can still smell the rose amber scent lingering. The world is wide, but here it's being stitched together with invisible threads. Later, as the evening falls, you and she walk in the garden. Lanterns glow softly. She points to a new avenue of trees planted in two alternating species, one native, one foreign. "They'll grow together," she says. "By the time anyone notices, they'll share roots." You think of the young being coached to like French perfumes, of a fan painted in two, of a pastry shaped like a fleur-de-lis but spiced from afar. Seeds planted now for alliances decades later. At the garden's edge stands a small pavilion shaped like a ship's prow. Inside, maps of trade routes, sketches of costumes from distant, samples of cloth. This is her private war room of style. We're not only patrons, she tells you. We're diplomats. We don't cross borders, we draw them differently. Her voice is soft but certain, like the tide. A breeze carries the faint sound of foreign musicians rehearsing in the palace. You smell the perfume again, roses, amber, something secret. You feel the weight of the telescope in your hand. You've seen her survive scandal, build salons, print books. Now you see her conduct entire countries without lifting a sword. As you walk back inside, she glances at you. Remember, she whispers, treaties are written on paper, but trust is woven in silk. The corridor smells of cedar from the library, but also of the new rose amber scent. Layers of her influence overlap like scents on skin. You suspect the ambassadors will carry it home, and when their children's children catch a whiff of something similar, they'll remember this palace without knowing why. In your room on the table, someone has left a pastry half spiced, half sweet with a tiny flag made of sugar. Outside, the carriages roll away into the night. You take a bite. It tastes like distance folded into familiarity. You pull the blanket around you, the sounds of hooves fatting. In the hush before sleep, you think of her planting trees, blending perfumes, commissioning paintings, teaching a future queen to curtsy. Fashion as foreign policy, style as soft power, gifts as glue. You breathe out slowly, and the scent lingers. The carriages of diplomats have barely vanished into the dusk when another procession arrives, not ministers now, but musicians clutching cases, painters with rolled canvases, playwrights with ink-stained fingers. You smell oil paint and hear a lute being tuned. The mistress turns to you with a half-smile. Politics fades, she murmurs, but art lingers. Come, let's sculpt a future. You follow her through a side corridor into a wing you haven't seen before. The walls here are blank plaster, waiting for frescoes. The air smells of wet clay. Apprentices scurry past carrying pallets heavy with ultramarine, carmine, and real gold leaf. She has converted this wing of the palace into a workshop, a humming creative engine. They'll call it a golden age, she jokes softly, if the paint dries before the scandals do. You step into a studio where a painter, his name whispered to you as Boucher, studies sketches of her face. Mainstream historical fact glimmers. Madame Pompadour was not only the king's confidant, but also Boucher's patron, appearing in multiple portraits that defined Rococo elegance. Historians still argue whether she guided the style consciously to soften public perception of herself, or simply liked the pastel hues. Either way, those images spread across Europe in miniature, hanging in parlors as far away as Stockholm and Naples, quietly teaching people what French taste meant. The mistress sits for a quick sketch but interrupts to suggest a background, not a throne room but a garden dotted with classical ruins. It makes power look timeless, she tells the painter, and me like a passing breeze. She winks at you. She knows self-mythology is part of the job. You wander into another chamber where a composer tests a new piece on a harpsichord. The melody rises like a flock of birds. She leans on the instrument, suggesting a variation. Quirky tidbit from the composer. He's hidden a motif based on her initials into the score so that, to those who know, her name will echo every time the piece is played. He claims the echo will ripple through Europe's salons long after both of them are dust. At a long table in the gallery, she reviews small maquettes, tiny clay models of fountains, statues, even a proposed stage set for a new opera. We're designing dreams, she murmurs, fingers tracing the outline of a nymph. She asks you to imagine how a guest will feel walking past the statue after leaving a council meeting. They'll think of grace, she says. Grace is good for policy. Through an open door you glimpse a rehearsal. Actors in masks trying out lines from a new comedy that pokes gentle fun at the bureaucracy. She encourages them. Better they laugh here than riot outside, she whispers to you. You think of her gardens, her perfumes, her cross-border gifts. Now she's shaping public mood with plays and pageants. She takes you to a hidden alcove lined with portfolios of engravings. These she will distribute as gifts to provincial governors, to foreign visitors, to sympathetic journalists. Every print a seed, she says, echoing her phrase about trees. Plant enough images and people will think in you. The smell of fresh ink blends with the rose amber scent from last night's reception. You're inside a living feedback loop. Diplomacy feeds art, art feeds diplomacy. A chamber singer practices a song commissioned for an upcoming festival of peace. The lyrics seem innocent, flowers blooming, rivers flowing, but each verse carries metaphors about unity between nations. No one can protest a melody, the mistress whispers. It travels without passports. Historians still argue whether such performances genuinely softened rivalries or merely provided spectacle. But you watch courtiers sway unconsciously to the rhythm and think the answer may not matter. Mood is momentum. She leads you to a small gallery newly hung with portraits not of nobles, but of scientists, writers, even peasants in heroic poses. Power, she says softly, comes from showing what else could be powerful. Quirky tidbit from the curator. One of the peasant models later became a local celebrity. His likeness used on bread wrappers 2 centuries later, a strange echo of her experiment. You find yourselves in the palace. The stage is under construction for a new production combining dance, machinery, and fireworks, an early multimedia extravaganza. Carpenters hammer quietly while dancers mark steps. She watches, making notes. We'll invite the city, she says. Let them taste for free. Gratitude lasts longer than taxes. The soft sarcasm in her voice makes you smile. Later, in her private sitting room, she shows you a ledger. Instead of account columns, each page lists names of artists and sums paid. She traces a finger down the list. Each coin a brushstroke, she murmurs. This is my true portrait. She laughs softly at her own earnestness, then adds, besides, it's cheaper than an army. The room grows quiet except for the scratch of her quill as she writes a letter of introduction for a young sculptor to a prince abroad. He'll carry our style with him, she says. Like a missionary but with chisels. You think of how Jesuit missionaries carried European clocks to China. Now she sends sculptors instead of sermons. As twilight deepens, she takes you to a balcony overlooking the city. Below, apprentices hang banners for tomorrow's pageant. The breeze carries snatches of music. They'll talk about the king, she says, but they'll hum my tune. She laughs, a sound like wind through silk. And by the time they notice, the world will have shifted an inch. You watch lights flicker in distant streets. She tells you of a project to publish cheap engravings of scientific discoveries, mixed with fashionable allegories, so that even shopkeepers feel part of a grand story. The mind is the ultimate territory, she whispers. Decorate it first. Mainstream historical fact again. Many royal-sponsored salons and operas that helped spread Enlightenment ideas even as their patrons served absolute monarchs. Historians still argue whether these women were sincere champions of knowledge or simply polishing their image. But without their money and networks, many works might never have been printed, staged, or played. Back inside, she invites you to help choose for a new mural. You dip a brush into a bowl of pigment ground from lapis lazuli, a blue once worth more than gold. A sky for our ceiling, she smiles. You paint a line. It glows in the candlelight. Imagine, she says, someone standing here centuries from now looking up. They won't know our names, but they'll feel this blue. As night thickens, the artists retreat one by one, leaving brushes in jars, scores on stands, masks on hooks. The palace grows hushed again. She sits by the harpsichord, playing a slow fragment of the new piece, the hidden motif of her initials weaving through. You lean against the doorway, drowsy, the notes like falling feathers. She looks up. Remember when I said we were gardeners, she murmurs. Art is another garden. Some seeds bloom in a season, others take lifetimes. She gestures to the blank walls, the rolled canvases, the stacks of engraved plates. This is tomorrow's past, she says. We're making it now. Outside your window, You see the alternating trees of her diplomatic avenue. Inside, the walls bloom with sketches, music plays. Perfume, silk, treaties, art. A tapestry. You close your eyes, hearing the faint echo of the harpsichord, smelling oil paint and rose amber, feeling the lapis dust on your fingertips. You think of future humming this melody, of peasants buying bread with a portrait born here, of historians still arguing but everyone living inside the world she designed. You wake to a quieter palace. The scent of paint and harpsichord notes has thinned, replaced by wax and dust. The corridors echo when you walk them. The mistress is older now, not old exactly, but her eyes carry stories like books carried under an arm. The same hands that once plucked rare silks now turn pages of letters in a small morning room. You feel the shift immediately. The court still glitters, but she is no longer at its center. She beckons you to sit by the window. Outside, the avenue of trees she planted for diplomacy has grown tall enough to knit their branches overhead. Looks like an arch now, she murmurs. No one remembers why we planted them. She says it without bitterness, more as an observation. Power has its own seasons, and she has entered autumn. Mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Madame Pompadour died in 1764, still but exhausted by years of managing politics, culture, and the king's moods. Many of her projects continued after her death, shaping French taste into the Revolution. Historians still argue whether her influence softened the monarchy's image or, paradoxically, sharpened public resentment by flaunting privilege. Even in retreat, her name appears in pamphlets and gossip, a shorthand for a style of rule that mixed velvet with iron. She shows you a drawer of invitations she no longer attends, a masquerade ball at a younger noblewoman's salon, the premiere of an opera she once helped fund but now watches from a box seat at the edge. They dance my steps without me, she says, half smiling. You remember her coaching actors, commissioning perfumes, planting symbolic trees. Now those gestures circulate independently, like coins stamped with her face but spent by others. In a small workshop, she still supervises a handful of artists. A tapestry nears completion, its border repeating a motif from her first diplomatic reception. 2 fans crossed over a casket of herbs. This will hang in a provincial town hall, she tells you. They'll think it's just decoration. She laughs softly. Maybe it is. Quirky tidbit from one of the weavers. Hidden among the stitches is a tiny self-portrait of the mistress's pet spaniel, tail up as if sniffing out the past. It'll make her smile, the weaver whispers to you. Even queens need private jokes. Afternoons, she walks with you in a small garden at the palace edge where few courtiers wander. The statues she commissioned are weathering. Moss creeps up the marble ankles. I like them better like this, she says, brushing moss with her fingers. Less perfect, more alive. The breeze carries faint strains of a tune, the composer's piece with her initials hidden in it, played now by street musicians in the city below. She tilts her head. Listen, my name without my name. Her eyes glint with a mixture of pride and melancholy. You pass a group of younger chattering about a new fashion imported from England. They barely bow to her. She raises an eyebrow and whispers to you, "Don't worry, they think they're original." Then, softer, "Give them time, they'll find out what it costs." Inside, she still holds a few salons. They're smaller now, but the conversation is richer. Philosophers, scientists, minor poets gather by candlelight. She no longer tries to direct the talk, she lets it flow like a stream. Less a garden, more a meadow, she says, pouring tea. Historians still argue whether these late salons helped sow the ideas that would eventually challenge the very monarchy she served. She shrugs when you mention it. Ideas grow where they will, she murmurs. We just scatter seeds. One evening she takes you to the attic where boxes of old costumes and props are stored. Dust motes swirl in candlelight. She opens a trunk and lifts out a fan painted half in one kingdom's, half in another's, the first diplomatic fan. Do you remember, she asks, how the room exhaled? You do. She folds the fan, tucks it back. Things change, she says. Feelings linger. She shows you letters from artists she once sponsored who now work abroad, some in exile. One thanks her for saving him from debt. Another accuses her of abandoning him. She traces the handwriting with a fingertip. Patronage is a net, she says softly. Sometimes it catches you too. The palace, once a hub of experimentation, now stages lighter fare. She attends incognito, veiled, sitting in the back row. You sit beside her as a farce pokes fun at a caricature suspiciously like her younger self. She laughs quietly. If they're laughing, they're not guillotining, she jokes, then looks distant. At least not yet. At night in her apartments, the perfumers still bring vials, but she chooses softer scents, now lavender, dried hay, a hint of beeswax. No more memories to plant, she tells you, just comfort. Yet the rose amber perfume from that crucial treaty day still lingers in a bottle on her desk. She opens it once, inhales, closes it quickly. Too strong for sleep, she whispers. She writes her memoirs in fragments, not for publication, but for herself. You watch her scratch lines. I wanted to weave silk between swords. She stops, crosses it out. Too poetic, she mutters. Quirky tidbit, she has taken up amateur astronomy, climbing to the roof at night with a small telescope, the same miniature one given by a foreign envoy years ago. She points out constellations, mapping them like she once mapped court factions. They move too, she smiles, but slower. You sense her legacy taking shape not in objects but in habits. Courtiers now instinctively coordinate gowns with diplomatic events. Foreign visitors expect salons of ideas as part of statecraft. Musicians smuggle subtle political motifs into dance tunes. She has rewired the cultural reflexes of a whole generation. Yet she sits quietly on the balcony, a shawl around her shoulders, watching the city lights. Invisible threads, she murmurs. Best kind. No one can cut what they can't see. Mainstream historical fact again. Even after a royal mistress fell from or died, many of her aesthetic choices survived. Into national styles, French Rococo, English Palladian, Viennese classicism. Historians still argue whether this continuity shows their deep influence or just the inertia of fashion. Standing here, you feel it as an echo, like her initials hidden in a melody, vibrating long after the note ends. One late afternoon, she leads you to the Diplomatic Avenue again. The alternating trees are now thick trunks, their leaves interlace overhead. Children play beneath them, unaware they stand in a living symbol of an old alliance. She smiles faintly. See, it worked, just took time. She presses a seed into your hand, a cutting from one of the foreign species. Plant it wherever you go, she says. No one needs to know whose it was. That night she hosts one last small gathering in the library. The air smells of books and beeswax. She invites a young singer, a painter, a philosopher. They perform, talk, laugh. She sits back, eyes half closed, letting the voices mingle. She's handing the garden to new gardeners. As the candles burn low, she stands, smoothing her gown. Enough for tonight, she whispers. Tomorrow they'll invent their own perfumes. She looks at you and smiles, a little crooked now. Promise me you'll remember the quiet parts too, the moss on the statues, the taste of the pastry, the smell of ink. That's where the truth hides. You follow her to the balcony one last time. The city hums below, a soft background like a fan's whisper. She raises the telescope to her eye, tracking a slow star. There, she says. Light from centuries ago. We're always seeing the past. She lowers it, hands it to you. Through the lens, the star glows steady, older than any court. You breathe in, the scents of lavender and old paper mingling. The palace around you seems both solid and already fatting into memory. She turns to go inside, pausing to run her hand over the stone balustrade worn smooth by years of elbows and schemes. Everything leaves a trace, she murmurs. Even us. You blink and the candlelight softens into neon. The marble corridors dissolve into glass walkways. Somewhere a phone buzzes. You're still walking beside her, but she's no longer a royal mistress. She's a modern celebrity, a philanthropist, a style icon photographed leaving a gala. Her perfume is subtler now, but the cameras still catch it in the air. You've stepped forward in time to the echo of everything you've witnessed. The stage is different, the costumes digital, but the choreography is eerily familiar. You pass a billboard showing a pop star arriving at a climate summit in a gown made from recycled ocean plastic. She isn't in government. She isn't anyone's consort, yet her choice of dress dominates headlines about the summit more than the speeches inside. Sound familiar? Your companion whispers. The soft sarcasm makes you smile. You remember diplomatic fans, pastries with foreign spices, statues planted like arguments. Now it's hashtags and capsules of perfume, but the trick is the same. Style as signal, glamour as glue. Mainstream historical fact surfaces. Diana, Princess of Wales, wielded soft power through fashion and causes, shifting public opinion on AIDS, and Obama used designers from diverse backgrounds to embody a political message of inclusion. Even studying law or at the UN borrow the old pattern, personal aura crossing into public policy. Historians still argue whether these gestures genuinely move policy or simply sell magazines. But as you scroll headlines on a glowing screen, you feel the echo of salons, operas and treaties woven in silk. The mistress, or her modern avatar, leads you into a green room where stylists pin fabric, publicists draft captions. "This is the new court," she murmurs. "Fewer dukes, more influencers." You look around. A vegan chef preparing a snack with spices from 4 continents. A sound engineer cueing a remix that samples an 18th century harpsichord piece. You catch the hidden motif of her initials. A social impact manager briefing her on a donation to a refugee charity. Quirky tidbit. The snack being served is shaped like the old diplomatic pastry you tasted in the palace, now rebranded as a fusion energy bite for photo ops. You laugh softly. She winks. Some recipes never die. You move with her through airports and award shows, watching her drop hints of policy positions in interviews, fund artists in underserved communities, invite rival brands to collaborate on peace capsules of limited edition clothes. You remember her phrase about planting seeds. "Instagram is just faster soil," she whispers. "Everything sprouts overnight, for better or worse." She shows you a direct message from a young activist halfway across the world, thanking her for amplifying a cause. "In the old days," she says, "we'd send a fan or a tapestry. Now we send a repost." She shrugs. "Still a gift, still a bridge." As you walk through a museum wing dedicated to 18th century fashion, you see a portrait of her former self, powdered hair, pastel gown, a faint smile. Next to it, a show's side-by-side images of modern celebrities in similar poses. The caption reads, "Soft power and style, then and now." A group of students murmurs, taking selfies. "They don't know me," she says softly, "but they're standing in my garden." She takes you behind the scenes of a streaming platform documentary she's producing about forgotten women who shaped policy through culture. She interviews historians on camera, challenging. "They think we were just ornaments," she mutters between takes. "Let's show them the strings we pulled." Historians still argue whether the framing of mistress as power broker gives too much agency or not enough. She invites debate. "Debate keeps the story alive," she smiles. "Silence kills it." In a quiet moment, she hands you her phone. On it, a playlist of songs sampling Baroque melodies, Rococo palettes turned into digital filters, emojis of fans, swans, and telescopes. "I like leaving trails," she whispers. "Little motifs. People pick them up without knowing." You accompany her to a small studio where she funds young designers from former colonies. She tells them the history of diplomatic trees and perfumes, showing them sketches. They incorporate these stories into augmented reality clothes that bloom with foreign flowers when seen through a phone. "Fashion used to cross borders slowly," she tells you. "Now it teleports. Use it well." She's still teaching a new generation of soft power gardeners. Evenings, she retreats from the glare into a private room, no cameras, just books, a telescope on the balcony. She still looks at stars. "Same light," she murmurs, "different sky." She scrolls through comments from strangers, some grateful, some cruel. She sighs but doesn't stop. "In my time they hissed in pamphlets," she says. "Now they hiss online. Same snakes, new holes." You sit with her as she drafts a speech for a youth summit. She writes in the margins, "Weave silk between swords," the line she once crossed out. This time she leaves it. She laughs. Finally poetic enough. Outside, city traffic hums like the soft fan she once told viewers to turn on before sleep. You sense continuity more than change. Perfumed air swapped for algorithmic feeds, salons for podcasts, engravings for memes. Yet the core remains. People leaning in, eyes shining, waiting to be guided by someone who seems to know a secret. She looks at you. "Tell them the secret," she whispers. "It's just listening, always was." She sets down her phone, picks up the telescope, and shows you a star. You think of her gardens, her operas, her perfumes, her posts. All different mediums for the same ancient game, making people feel connected across distance. Mainstream historical fact once more. Scholars of celebrity culture trace a line from early modern courts to Hollywood studios and influencer networks. Patronage systems persist, brands now instead of kings, algorithms instead of heralds. Historians still argue whether this democratizes soft power or just repackages it. But sitting here with her, you feel the echo of a Rococo room in every glowing screen. She presses a seed into your hand again, this time a tiny NFC chip containing an archive of her projects. "Plant it anywhere," she says. "It will sprout as data." She smiles, the same crooked smile from the balcony. No one needs to know whose it was. You close your eyes. The hum of traffic becomes the murmur of a salon. The scent of coffee becomes rose amber. Centuries fold like a fan. You're still in her garden, still listening to her voice. Now the edges of the story soften, like candlelight melting into dawn. You're still holding that tiny seed, or chip, feeling its cool weight in your palm. Around you, the sounds have slowed. Car engines to carriages to hoofbeats to silence. Her voice becomes a whisper that seems to come from very far away and very close at once. She tells you it's all right to let go of the images. The gowns, the perfumes, the hidden motifs in music, the hashtags, the trees arching over a path. They'll stay where they need to stay. You've walked through centuries tonight, watching a single thread of soft power winding from Rococo parlors to greenrooms lit by phones. You've seen how a gesture can outlast a reign, how a scent can travel farther than an army, how a melody can survive its composer. As you breathe, notice how your own body feels heavier, slower. The room around you, whether it's a bedroom or a train seat or a tiny dorm with a fan humming, is quietly present. That hum is your anchor. Let the images fade like stage lights after a performance, leaving only a soft afterglow. She places a hand on your shoulder, a gesture of closing. "Rest now," she whispers. "History will keep spinning." Her footsteps recede, blending with the background. The garden of stories remains, but you can leave it for the night. Inhale once more, exhale slowly. Imagine the alternating trees overhead, their leaves forming a canopy of shade. Under it you lie back, sky full of old stars, the scent of lavender, the soft hiss of night air. Everything you've heard becomes a lullaby. You're safe. You're here. Sleep drifts up like a tide. Sweet dreams.